Hello and welcome to The World Today. I'm Eleanor Hall.
And I'm John Highfield. This Monday, not recalcitrant, but rehabilitated, and also back in vogue, as Malaysia's Prime Minister Dr. Mahathir Mohamad arrives in Washington to a hero's welcome for his assistance in the US declared war on terror. He plans an early election.
And a political battle with a difference in the top end, as two federal politicians brawl over who gets prime office space in Darwin.
The New South Wales Premier Bob Carr says it's about time heavy censorship was ended in Australia. Speaking in Sydney late this morning, he said the farcical off-again, on-again Commonwealth treatment of the French film Baise Moi carried connotations of a return to the bad old days of heavy-handed censorship, with ill-trained vice squad police tramping into bookstores, art galleries and cinemas to seize reels of film, books and paintings. Mr Carr says he's asked his advisers to look for loopholes to legally stymie the Commonwealth censorship action. The New South Wales Premier has been speaking to The World Today's Nick Grimm.
Premier Bob Carr, you say adults should be allowed to see what they want to. Can I ask you, have you seen yourself Baise Moi, and what did you think of it?
I haven't seen it.
How did you manage to form an opinion on it then?
Well, I'm not forming an opinion on it. I'm forming an opinion on the thoroughly unsatisfactory approach that seems to have been taken on this, a complaint made to a Conservative federal government. I'm prepared to believe this is the lousiest and most offensive film we've seen in a long time, but I find it unsatisfactory that we've got police seizing reels of film, in effect, just as I'd find it unsatisfactory that we were allowing police to close down theatre or take books out of bookshops. Someone's got to say that we don't want to go back to those days, and it's a reasonable principle that subject to the obvious qualifications, adults ought to be able to see and read what they want.
Well, the federal authorities have decided to ban the film. Shouldn't that be the end of the matter?
I think it's appropriate that someone say in 2003, someone in the Australian political system, that we hope we're not going back to the days when you had police devoting their time to taking books out of bookshops, to collecting reels of film from cinemas, and to charging into a theatre and closing down a drama. We don't want to go back to those days. Now, it's worthwhile making that point because the second decision on this film has been triggered by complaints made to the federal government. Let's remember that these are the same people in Canberra who were attempting 2 months ago to close down medical research because it offended their moral view of the universe.
OK, that said, what can you do about it as a state premier?
Well, it's unclear. The initial advice is that the opportunity for the state to do anything other than to have its agencies enforce a decision made at the Commonwealth level is non-existent. We've asked the Solicitor General for New South Wales, Mr Ian Knight, the Crown Solicitor for New South Wales, Mr Ian Knight, to give us more considered legal advice, and in particular to look at whether there's any opportunity for asserting the decades-old principle that, subject to the usual qualifications, it's wise to allow adults to see and read what they want to.
So if there's scope, you're prepared to defy the national ban?
It's not a matter of defying the national ban, it's a matter of seeing what openings are available under New South Wales law. At the very least, though, I hope my comments have sent a signal to Commonwealth authorities that this should not be... No one should take encouragement out of the decision of the Classification Review Board to attempt to go the next step and swoop on another film and even introduce the banning of books. I want to resist any notion that we're going back to the days of the 60s and early 70s when people got very busy asserting that adults could not read and see in the cinema or in a theatre what they wanted to do, what they wanted to see.
What's your view of the way the national authorities have handled this?
I think the federal government's starting consistently to respond to pressure from very conservative people. You saw that in their attempts to ban medical research. Perhaps you saw it in their persecution of Justice Michael Kirby.
It has been suggested today that you're just grandstanding over this matter and you know that there's nothing you can do about it.
Well, any comments by a politician in a democracy could be dismissed as grandstanding. But I've got an opinion, and being Premier, there's some interest in what my opinion is. And someone ought to be saying in this debate that any attempt to revive the approach to censorship that burdened this country in the 1960s and early 70s will be resisted.
Shall we see Baise Moi return to our cinema screens?
I think the chances are unlikely, given that initial advice is that the decision of the Classification Review Board is final, but we're exploring whether there is any legal ambiguity.
Bob Carr, the New South Wales Premier, with World Today reporter Nick Grimm.
Well, one of the Coalition's federal politicians instrumental in having the film reclassified and reviewed is Trish Draper, a Liberal from South Australia. Ms Draper is a member of a group of federal MPs called the Lyons Forum, which supports conservative family values. And she says she pushed for Baise Moi to be banned on behalf of her constituents after receiving a complaint from a small group of voters and a local Festival of Light representative. Trish Draper is in our Canberra studio, and she's speaking to Alexandra Kirk about her reaction to today's moves by the New South Wales Premier.
Firstly, Trish Draper, have you seen Baise Moi?
No, I haven't. I have been invited on several occasions, of course, by my colleagues to view the film, but what I've done is taken their word for it, and journalists themselves who have said that they felt the film contravened the guidelines.
Well, if you're urging for such radical action, shouldn't you see it yourself?
Well, the concerns were raised by my constituents to myself. As a federal MP, I have to take their case up on their behalf. At the same time, I have to make the decision whether I'm going to see the film or not see the film, and quite frankly, there's enough violence and rape and murder and all those sorts of things in the world that we have to deal with on a daily basis, and if I can avoid seeing that, I would rather avoid it.
So do you see yourself as the moral arbiter of books and films and scientific research in Australia?
No, I certainly don't. In this instance, what I've been doing is supporting my constituents' concerns. I do believe, and that's been vindicated now, that the film Baise Moi did contravene the guidelines, and Bob Carr said it himself. Adults should be allowed to see and hear what they would like within reason, and that is part of the guidelines. What we're asking for is that to be upheld.
Well, thousands of people have seen the film. You haven't heard of many complaints. You haven't seen people demonstrating against the film outside cinemas. There hasn't been a flood of public outrage. So on what basis do you agitate for such unusual action as banning a film that's already been given an R classification and there's no chance of children seeing it? Why shouldn't adults be allowed to make their own judgment?
It was given an R classification, I think wrongly, and as we do now, the Federal Review Board has refused classification because it does contravene the guidelines, particularly with regards to sexual violence. Now, the warning that came out originally from the Classification Board was that there was sexual violence in the film. Well, if there is such, you cannot have an R18 plus classification. Once that film is out there in the community under an R classification, it can come out as a video, it can come into family homes, and yes, children can come into contact with that, and that's a concern of mine.
Bob Carr says he's concerned about a return to 1960s and 70s style censorship of books, films, theatre, scientific research. Would you like to see that occur?
I think he's being ridiculous. What we have here is a film that was wrongly classified to begin with, contravened the guidelines, and I'd also like to point out to Premier Bob Carr that Michael Atkinson, the Labor Party Attorney General, supports the banning of the film in South Australia. That's correct.
Bob Carr says he is examining his options. What do you understand his options to be? Does he have any?
Well, I don't have any legal sort of experts working on my team as far as that goes, but as far as I can ascertain, once the federal decision has been brought down, then that is it for Australia, including all of the states.
The states don't have classification review boards of their own in their own jurisdiction?
They do, and again, I would like to point out that any state Attorney General does have the power to ask, as the Federal Attorney General did, for a review of any film as they see fit.
Trish Draper, thank you.
You're welcome.
Federal Liberal politician Trish Draper speaking to Alexandra Kirk in Canberra.